She called my life's work a political slush fund on air, a furious Texas pastor stated after Megyn Kelly targeted his youth charity, forcing Jasmine Crockett to make a public demand. "Retract your accusation, or I will personally fly this pastor to New York so he can show your audience his financial records on your program." The raw, trembling anger in Pastor Alastair Finch's voice, captured by a local Dallas news camera, was the spark that ignited a national firestorm. Within an hour, the clip of the 68-year-old pastor standing on the steps of his humble community center was everywhere. It was immediately followed by footage of Crockett's response, a masterclass in political stagecraft. The visual of the Congresswoman, not behind a lectern in Washington but standing on the scuffed floor of a gymnasium, the sound of bouncing basketballs echoing behind her, created an undeniable split-screen narrative. On one side, a media personality in a soundproof studio. On the other, a community fighting back from the place it called home. News chyrons across every network began to flash with variations of the same theme. Crockett challenges Kelly, show the receipts, and pastor at center of media, Storm demands apology. The battle lines weren't just drawn. They were broadcast in high definition. 3 days earlier, the world was considerably quieter. Inside the sleek, glass-walled offices of MK Media in New York, Megyn Kelly was in huntress mode. She was scrolling through a summary from her producer, a hungry, ambitious young man named Brendan. He had been tasked with a deep dive into the financials of several members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, looking for patterns, vulnerabilities, or anything that smelled of hypocrisy. Most of it was dry, procedural, and useless for her show. But then Brendan highlighted a single line item from Jasmine Crockett's latest FEC filing. It was small, almost trivial. A $500 donation. "Megyn, look at this," Brendan said, pointing to the line on his tablet. "Donation, Hopewell Community Center annual fundraiser. It's a church-affiliated group in South Dallas. Looks like a standard youth center." Megyn leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. To anyone else, it was political boilerplate. A local politician supporting a local charity. Good optics. Nothing more. But to Megyn, it was a thread. A loose thread on a sweater that, if pulled correctly, could unravel the whole thing. She didn't see a donation. She saw a transaction. "A youth center," she said, tasting the words. "That's what they always call them. Dig into this Hopewell. Who runs it?" "Pastor Alastair Finch. Get me everything on him. What's his history with Crockett? Pull every photo of them together, every mention in the local paper. Is this how she shores up her base, funneling campaign money back into the community, not as charity, but as payment for loyalty?" Brendan's eyes lit up. He saw the angle taking shape. "So we frame it as a quid pro quo? She gives them money, they get out the vote for her?" "Hey, don't be so crude, Brendan," Megyn chided, though a hint of a smile played on her lips. "We don't have to say it, we just have to ask the questions. We present the documents. The donation, the photos of her at their events, year after year. We highlight the pastor's sermons, if they're political. We build a case, brick by brick, and let the audience be the jury. It's clean. It's based on her own filings. Let her deny it." She felt the familiar thrill of the chase. This wasn't just a segment. It was a story about how power really works, and she was the one who was going to expose it. She was confident, certain she was on the verge of uncovering a truth that Crockett had successfully hidden in plain sight. Nearly 1,500 miles away, under the hot Texas sun, Jasmine Crockett was dealing with a much more immediate problem. A mountain of donated backpacks threatening to topple over. She was at the Hopewell Community Center for their 15th annual back-to-school bonanza, an event that had grown from a small table in the church basement to a full-blown neighborhood festival. The air was filled with the smell of grilled hot dogs and the sound of children laughing as they lined up for free haircuts. Crockett, in jeans and a t-shirt from a local university, was laughing as she helped Pastor Alastair Finch sort supplies. "Pastor, next year we're going to need a bigger gym," she said, hoisting a box filled with notebooks and crayons onto a folding table. Pastor Finch, a tall, sturdy man whose warm smile was as much a fixture of the community as the church steeple, wiped a bead of sweat from his brow. Or fewer generous people, which is a problem I'm happy to have. "Thank you for the contribution, Jasmine. That $500 from the campaign bought all these scientific calculators. You know the schools don't provide them anymore." "Don't thank me, thank the folks who donate," Crockett said. "This is what it's for. You told me last month the kids in the tutoring program needed them." Their conversation wasn't about polling or fundraising or political strategy. It was about the center's leaky roof, which had damaged 2 computers in their small lab. It was about the grant application for a new van to pick up kids whose parents worked late. Crockett was there not just as a congresswoman, but as a partner. She had seen firsthand the life-changing work the center did. She knew the names of the kids who had gone from failing grades to the honor roll because of Pastor Finch's tutoring program. She had attended the funerals of teenagers the pastor had tried, and failed, to save from street violence. Her connection to Hopewell wasn't a line item on a public filing. It was written in years of shared struggle and shared triumphs. This place and this man were part of the bedrock of her district. An attack on them wouldn't feel political. It would feel personal. The red on-air light glowed in the quiet, climate-controlled Sirius XM studio. Megyn Kelly adjusted her headphones and leaned into the microphone, a faint, confident smile on her face. Her desk was neatly arranged with a printout of the FEC filing, a biography of Pastor Finch compiled by Brendan, and several glossy photos of Crockett at Hopewell events. She had her evidence. She had her narrative. "Good afternoon and welcome back to the Megyn Kelly Show," she began, her voice a smooth, authoritative instrument. "We talk a lot on this show about the swamp, about the backroom deals and the webs of influence that control our political systems. It's easy to think of it as something that happens far away, in the marble halls of Congress, but sometimes the most brazen examples of corruption are happening right in our own backyards, disguised as something wholesome, disguised as charity." She let the word hang in the air for a beat. "We're told that our leaders are public servants, that they work for us. But what if the system is rigged? What if they use the very mechanisms of their office, their campaign funds, their influence, not to serve the public, but to build political machines, to reward their allies and ensure their own power?" Today, I want to take you to Texas, to the 30th Congressional District, represented by one of the most prominent progressive voices in the country, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. She paused, taking a sip of water. She was an expert at pacing, at building suspense. Her millions of listeners, in their cars, offices, and homes, were leaning in. Now, Congresswoman Crockett presents herself as a fighter for the people, a champion of the little guy. But a look at her own public campaign finance reports tells a different story. A very interesting story. "My team and I found a curious little entry, a donation from friends of Jasmine Crockett to a place called the Hopewell Community Center in Dallas." She held up the paper to the in-studio camera for her YouTube audience. "It's not a huge amount, just $500. Some might say, what's the big deal, Megyn? It's just a small donation to a local charity." And to that I say, you have to look closer. You always have to look closer. Brendan, in the control room, queued up the photos on the monitor. The images appeared on the YouTube feed. Crockett smiling, shaking hands with Pastor Finch. Crockett cutting a ribbon. Crockett serving meals. "This is not a one-time thing," Kelly continued, her voice hardening with prosecutorial zeal. "This is a pattern, a long and cozy relationship between a powerful politician and a local organization run by a man named Pastor Alastair Finch." We did some digging. This center receives federal grants. It operates on the public's dime. And yet, it functions as a political hub in the heart of Crockett's district, a place where she is a celebrated hero, a place to guarantee votes, to mobilize supporters, all while cloaked in the virtuous robes of a church. She was weaving the threads together, transforming a community center into a political conspiracy. The $500 donation was no longer a gift for calculators. It was a payoff. The photos were no longer evidence of community engagement. They were proof of a clandestine partnership. So you have to ask yourself, Kelly said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. What is the Hopewell Community Center, really? Is it a place for children, or is it a political slush fund, designed to wash campaign money and turn it into guaranteed votes? This isn't charity. This is a taxpayer-deceiving, campaign finance-abusing slush fund, designed to keep one politician in power. And at the center of it all is a so-called pastor, Alastair Finch. She lingered on his name, her tone dripping with disdain, branding him not as a man of God, but as a political operative in a collar. She had laid her case, and as the show went to a commercial break, she felt a surge of satisfaction. It was a solid hit. Document-based. Hard to refute. She had exposed the truth in Dallas. Pastor Finch was in his small, cluttered office at the back of the center, trying to fix a wobbly leg on a donated desk. His cell phone, an old flip phone, started vibrating violently on the table. It was one of his deacons, a man named Gerald. "Pastor, you need to turn on the radio, the talk radio," Gerald said, his voice frantic. "Some woman up in New York, she's talking about you, about the center." Before Pastor Finch could even respond, his office line began to ring. It was a parishioner who had been driving home from work. Then another call came through on his cell. And another. Within minutes, the story was all over his small community. He was confused at first, then a cold dread washed over him as he pieced together what was being said. He? A fraud? Hopewell? A slush fund? The work of his entire adult life. The sanctuary he had built with his own two hands. The place where he had counseled grieving mothers and celebrated college acceptance letters, was being slandered on a national stage by a woman he had never met. The initial shock quickly curdled into a deep, righteous anger. This wasn't about him. It was about his kids. It was about his community. It was about the very idea that doing good could be twisted into something so ugly. Just as he was trying to process the flood of calls, he heard a commotion outside. A white news van from a local TV station had pulled up in front of the center, its satellite dish already extending towards the sky. A reporter and a cameraman were jogging towards his front door. They had caught the scent of a story. A national firebrand attacking a beloved local figure. Pastor Finch straightened his collar, took a deep breath, and walked out to meet them. The reporter, a young woman, began her question. "Pastor Finch, Megyn Kelly just accused you on her show of—" But Pastor Finch held up a hand, his face a mask of fury and hurt. The camera zoomed in, capturing the raw emotion in his eyes. You didn't need to hear the accusation repeated. He had lived his response for 40 years. "She called my life's work a political slush fund on air," he said, his voice shaking but clear as a bell. The line that would echo across the country had just been spoken. The camera held tight on Pastor Alastair Finch's face, a landscape of dignified pain. He did not shout. He did not perform for the camera. He simply spoke the truth as he knew it, his voice a low, steady rumble of disbelief and wounded pride. "A slush fund?" he repeated, shaking his head slowly. "I invite Miss Kelly to come to Dallas. I invite her to tell that to the little girl who gets her only hot meal of the day right here in our cafeteria. I invite her to tell that to the boy who learned to read in our library because his parents work 2 jobs and can't help him at home. I invite her to look the mothers of this community in the eye and tell them this place, their only safe harbor, is a lie." He pointed a slightly trembling finger back at the entrance to the center. "This building was built with bake sales and car washes and the nickels and dimes of good people. My wife, God rest her soul, laid the first bricks with her own 2 hands. We have served this community for 40 years. We have buried its children and celebrated its triumphs. For anyone, especially someone with a microphone that big, to call us a slush fund, it's not just an insult, it's a desecration." That was the clip. That was the moment the narrative shattered in Megyn Kelly's hands. The story was no longer about a politician's finances. It was about a pastor's honor. It was about a community's sanctuary. The first person in Jasmine Crockett's orbit to see it was her district director, a sharp, tech-savvy woman named Maya. She was scrolling through social media on her lunch break when the video appeared, retweeted by a Dallas Morning News reporter. She watched it once, then a second time, a cold knot forming in her stomach. She immediately forwarded the link to her boss with a 3-word text. Code red. Call me. Congresswoman Crockett was in a tedious House Oversight Committee briefing in Washington when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the text from Maya, her brow furrowing. Code red was reserved for genuine crises. Excusing herself, she stepped into the echoing marble hallway and called back. What is it, Maya? Just watch the link I sent you, Maya said, her voice tight. Crockett pulled up the video. As she watched Pastor Finch speak, his face etched with pain, her expression changed from curiosity to stony fury. The politician receded. And the public defender, the advocate, the woman who had sat in that very center just days ago, emerged. She saw past the camera, and saw the man she knew being publicly humiliated. She saw the backdrop she knew, the place of safety and hope, being slandered. This was not a political attack to be managed with a press release. This was a violation. Cancel my afternoon, Crockett said, her voice dangerously quiet. Get the D.C. office to book the gymnasium at Hopewell for a press conference, tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. Central, and get me on the next flight out of Reagan National. I'm going home. The firestorm erupted with astonishing speed. While Crockett was in the air, the story mutated online. Hashtag #EcoMesstand with Hopewell began to trend nationally. People weren't just sharing the clip of Pastor Finch. They were sharing the Hopewell Community Center's own social media posts from over the years. Photos of smiling kids with their new backpacks. A grainy video of the youth choir singing at Christmas. A picture of the worn-out basketballs and the message, "Our kids wore these out. Time for some new ones." Each image was a silent, powerful rebuttal to Kelly's narrative and the music's. The contrast was brutal and visually undeniable. In one corner was a multi-million-dollar media operation. In the other was a rundown gym asking for donations to buy basketballs. Donations, which had trickled into the center's outdated website at a rate of $10 or $20 a day, suddenly became a tidal wave. The site's server, accustomed to minimal traffic, crashed repeatedly. But with the support came the poisons. The center's single phone line became unusable, jammed with a constant stream of vile, racist tirades from anonymous callers across the country. Cars with out-of-state plates began to drive slowly past the center, the occupants sometimes shouting insults out the window. The sanctuary had become a target. That evening, Pastor Finch sat alone in his office, the door locked. The celebratory calls from supporters had died down, replaced by the grim reality of the threats. He had to ask 3 deacons to stand guard at the entrance and escort the remaining kids in the after-school program to their parents' cars. He looked at a faded photograph on his desk of him and his wife, Delia, taken the day the center opened. She was beaming, a smudge of mortar on her cheek. He could almost hear her voice, always practical, always calm. "Alistair, what have you gotten us into?" For the first time he felt a flicker of doubt. He had spoken out in anger. But in doing so, had he painted a target on the backs of the very children he had sworn to protect? The weight of it felt immense, heavier than any burden he had carried in 40 years. When Jasmine Crockett's car pulled up to the center late that night, the building was dark, except for the single light in the pastor's office window. She found him slumped in his chair, looking utterly defeated. He looked up as she entered, and his first words were an apology. "Congresswoman Jasmine, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice raspy. "I never meant to bring this down on you. I lost my temper." Crockett walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Pastor, stop right there," she said firmly but gently. "You have nothing to apologize for. You spoke the truth. An attack on you, on this center, is an attack on the heart of our community. That's not your burden to carry. It's mine, and I promise you, I've got your back. Later, sitting in the quiet of her own Dallas home, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a deep, weary ache. Her phone rang. It was her mother, Jasmine. "I saw it on the news." Her mother's worried voice came through the line. "This Megyn Kelly? She seems vicious. Are you sure about this? Why does it always have to be you picking the biggest fights? Is it worth it, baby?" Crockett leaned her head back against the sofa and closed her eyes. The threats her office had received that day flashed through her mind. Ugly, violent emails and voicemails that her staff had to sift through. "Mama," she said, her voice soft but unwavering, "if I'm not willing to fight for a good man like Pastor Finch when he gets torn down by a bully, then what is the point of me being in Washington in the first place? This isn't about picking a fight. It's about finishing one someone else started. This is exactly what it's for." The next morning, the Hopewell Community Center's gymnasium was unrecognizable. The usual sounds of scuffed sneakers and bouncing balls were replaced by the hum of television cameras and the frantic clicking of keyboards. Every major network had sent a crew. The bleachers, usually filled with cheering parents, were packed with solemn-faced members of the community, and a handful of kids from the center, their expressions a mixture of fear and curiosity. Jasmine Crockett, flanked by Pastor Finch, walked not to a podium, but to a simple microphone stand placed on the center court line. She was dressed in a simple navy blazer and gray slacks, projecting an air of sober seriousness. She waited for the camera flashes to subside. She began not with an attack, but with a story. 5 years ago, she said, her voice calm and clear, a young man named Darnell, who was sitting right there in the third row, first came to this center. He was 14. He was reading at a 4th grade level, and he was one bad decision away from becoming another statistic. He wasn't a bad kid. He was just a kid who had been forgotten. But Pastor Finch didn't forget him. She paused, looking towards the teenager, who ducked his head with a shy smile. Pastor Finch and the tutors here worked with him every single day. Today, Darnell has a 3.8 GPA, and he has 2 acceptance letters from state universities. That is what this slush fund does. The gym was silent. The reporters, accustomed to political spin, were momentarily disarmed by the simple, human truth of her story. Then, Crockett's demeanor shifted. The advocate became a prosecutor. She held up a thick, binder-clipped document. "This," she announced, "is the Hopewell Community Center's independently audited financial report for the last 10 years. It's a public document. It's available to anyone who bothers to look for it. Or you could just do what journalists used to do. You could ask." She placed the binder on a small table next to the microphone. "These are the facts. Megyn Kelly, in her New York studio, did not call Pastor Finch. She did not call my office. She chose gossip over truth. She chose to attack a man who has dedicated 40 years of his life to a community she has never visited, to children she has never met, to a reality she clearly does not understand." The reporters scribbled furiously. This was the moment. "So my response is this," Crockett declared, her voice ringing with authority through the gymnasium. "The invitation to have Pastor Alastair Finch on your show is open. We will pay his way. Retract your accusation, or I will personally fly this pastor to New York so he can show your audience his financial records on your program. Let's see if your search for truth extends to your own studio." She finished, but did not move. She looked directly into the lens of the center camera, a silent challenge to Kelly. Then she turned, put her arm around Pastor Finch's shoulders, and guided him away from the microphone. "No questions," she said, her voice cutting through the rising clamor of the press corps. The image was indelible. The Congresswoman shielding the pastor, walking off their home court on their own terms. In New York, Megyn Kelly's team watched the press conference on a monitor in stunned silence. They had expected a defensive, politically worded denial. They had not expected this. They had not expected the gym, the kids, the audit, the direct, unblinking challenge. Brendan, the producer who had flagged the donation, felt a wave of nausea. He had given his boss a loaded gun, and she had fired it at a man who was now being hailed as a community saint. There was no easy way to spin this. Kelly's brand was built on being the fearless truth-teller. Now she was being framed as a careless bully who hadn't done her homework. For the first time, her team was silent. They had no counter-narrative. The next morning, the story took a turn no one could have predicted. In Dallas, there was a local talk radio host named Wallace "Wally" Keene. Wally was a conservative institution. A gruff, old-school Texan whose booming voice had been criticizing Democrats for 30 years. He disagreed with Jasmine Crockett on nearly every conceivable issue. His listeners expected him to join Kelly's attack, to pile on. Instead, Wally Keene opened his show with a long sigh. "Folks," he began, his voice unusually somber, "you know me. You know I wouldn't vote for Jasmine Crockett if she was running for dog catcher. I think her policies are taking a wrecking ball to this country. But that's politics." He paused and wanted to talk about something else. "I want to talk about Pastor Alastair Finch. I've been to the Hopewell Center's annual fish fry. I've shaken that man's hand, and let me tell you something. That man is no fraud. He is a pillar of his community. And what was done to him, the way his name was dragged through the mud by a media personality in New York who wouldn't know South Dallas from South Dakota, it was just plain wrong. It was a cheap shot. And in Texas, we don't take kindly to cheap shots." The switchboards at his station lit up like a Christmas tree. An unexpected ally had just entered the battlefield. Wally Keene's 2-minute monologue on Dallas Talk Radio was like a sonic boom that cracked the foundation of Megyn Kelly's narrative. His words, recorded on a dozen cell phones in the studio and uploaded instantly, spread through conservative media circles with the speed of a lit fuse. Keene was unimpeachable in his credentials. He was a veteran, a staunch fiscal conservative, and a man who had never said a kind word about a Democrat in his professional life. His defense of Pastor Finch wasn't a political calculation. It was a statement of local honor. Suddenly, the conversation changed. On blogs and podcasts, where Kelly was usually revered, there was now a flicker of dissent. Other local Texas commentators, who respected Wally Keene, followed his lead. His story was no longer a clean left versus right issue. It was now being framed as national media versus a Texas community, a narrative that resonated deeply in a state fiercely proud of its independence. The pressure on Megyn Kelly, which had been an external storm from her political opponents, now became an internal crisis. The ideological ground beneath her feet was shifting. Her audience didn't mind when she attacked politicians. They celebrated it. But attacking a pastor vouched for by one of their own? That was different. That felt like friendly fire. The silence from MK Media, which had been a strategic attempt to let the story die down, now looked like arrogance. For 2 days, Kelly's show went on, covering other topics, as if the Hopewell controversy didn't exist. The omission was deafening. Her subscribers and listeners flooded her comment sections and call-in lines. The question was always the same. Are you going to respond to Congresswoman Crockett? Are you going to apologize to the pastor? Finally, she had no choice. Her brand, built on fearlessly confronting uncomfortable truths, was being damaged by her refusal to confront one of her own. She opened her show on the 3rd day after the press conference with a somber, direct-to-camera address. She did not offer a full apology. That was not her style. Instead, she executed a masterful, strategic retreat. There's been a lot of noise over the past few days about a segment we did on this show about campaign finance and a community center in Dallas, Texas, she began, her expression serious. And I want to be very clear about something. My intention on this show is, and always has been, to ask hard questions about the systems of power in this country. My questions were about the legality and ethics of campaign donations to nonprofits. An issue I believe is vital. It was a macro-level critique. She paused, choosing her words with surgical precision. It was never my intention to personally impugn the character of any one individual, including Pastor Alastair Finch, or to denigrate the good work that the Hopewell Community Center may be doing on the ground. If my comments were heard that way, then I want to say directly that I regret that. The larger question about the commingling of politics and nonprofits remains a valid and important one for us to discuss. But on the specifics of this one center, the community has spoken with a loud and clear voice, and I hear them. It was a classic non-apology apology, a pivot back to her original abstract argument, a regret for how her words were heard, rather than for the words themselves. Crucially, she made no mention of Jasmine Crockett, or the challenge to host Pastor Finch on her show. It was a carefully constructed off-ramp, designed to appease the critics and change the subject without ceding victory or admitting true fault. She was trying to put the fire out, but Jasmine Crockett wasn't interested in putting the fire out. She was interested in using its light to illuminate a larger principle. The day after Kelly's clarification, she gave a single, exclusive interview to the Associated Press, ensuring her final statement would be recorded not as partisan spin, but as a matter of record. Sitting in the now quiet library of the Hopewell Center, she didn't gloat. She didn't spike the football. She redefined the terms of the victory. "This was never about a fight between me and a media host," she said calmly to the reporter. And frankly, it was never about getting an apology. This was about a fundamental principle. A person's reputation, their life's work, the sum of their character, should not be casually destroyed for clicks and ratings. A community's safe harbor should not be used as a prop in a political game. She looked around the room, at the shelves of donated books and the old, mismatched tables. When the attack came, this community did not wait for an apology. It did not wait for permission. It stood up, and it spoke its own truth. And that truth, spoken from the heart of this neighborhood, proved to be louder and more powerful than any microphone in a New York studio. That's the real story here. Then she delivered the final, tangible result of the battle. "The media attention brought something else," she said, a broad smile finally breaking across her face. "It brought an unbelievable outpouring of support from every corner of the country. I am thrilled to announce that the donations that have come into the Hopewell Center over the last week are more than enough to finally fix the leaky roof. They are enough to build a brand new, fully equipped computer lab for Darnell and all the other kids. They took an attack meant to tear this community down, and they used it to build themselves up. That is a victory no one can take away from them." The story, as a news item, faded over the next few weeks. The national media moved on to other outrages. Megyn Kelly's show returned to its usual fare. Jasmine Crockett went back to the legislative grind in Washington. But the echo of what happened in Dallas lingered. 3 weeks later, in the small town of Northgate, Ohio, the town council was meeting in a stuffy, wood-paneled room at the back of the municipal building. The final item on the agenda was a proposal to slash the budget for the local public library, a small, aging building whose funding had been chipped away for years. The move was expected to pass with little resistance. Then, a young woman named Clara stood up from the back of the room. She was the library's newest hire, just a year out of college, and she was visibly nervous, clutching a piece of paper in her hand. "Mr. Mayor, members of the council," she began, her voice barely a whisper. The council members looked on, bored and impatient. Clara took a deep breath. "Before you vote," she said, a little louder this time, "I want to tell you about a place in Texas I had never heard of until last month. It's called the Hopewell Community Center." A few of the council members looked up, a flicker of recognition in their eyes. "Some of you may have seen the story," Clara continued, her confidence growing as she spoke. "A media host tried to tear it down, call it a fraud, but the community, led by their Congresswoman, they fought back. They didn't just fight with words, they showed everyone what that center really was. It wasn't just a building, it was the heart of their town." She put down her paper and spoke from the heart. "This library," she said, gesturing around the room, "it's our heart. It's not just about the books on the shelves. It's about the toddlers who come for story time. It's about the seniors who come here because it's warm and they can have a conversation. It's about the teenagers who use our computers to apply for jobs and for college because they don't have internet at home. This library is our hopewell, and we need to fight for it." A smattering of applause broke out in the small audience. An elderly man stood up. "She's right," he said. "My wife passed last year. I come here every day. It's the only thing that gets me out of the house." Then another woman stood up to talk about how the librarians had helped her son create his first resume. One by one, the people of Northgate stood and shared their stories, building a wall of testimony around their small, forgotten library. The council members, who had expected an easy vote, looked at each other in stunned silence. They had misjudged the room. An hour later, the motion to cut the budget was tabled indefinitely. A Friends of the Northgate Library Committee was formed on the spot, with Clara as its chair. A small battle, in a small town, had been won, sparked by the echo of a much larger fight hundreds of miles away. How do we protect our local communities from being used as ammunition in national political wars? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that reveal the truth behind the headlines.